They said I was born from shame. That I ruined my mother's name just by breathing. That no matter how noble her blood once was, nothing could cleanse the stain of an illegitimate child. My name is Alara, daughter of Duke Morvain, or at least that's what I used to believe. I spent the first 16 years of my life walking the marble halls of House Morvain's estate like a ghost. Not quite a noble, not quite a servant. I dined in silence at the kitchen's back table, dressed in hand-me-downs from my half-sister Celine, and slept in the attic with mice for company. And I endured it. All of it. The sneers, the slaps, the whispered insults behind my back. Because I thought, naively, that if I just worked hard enough, smiled politely enough, stayed invisible enough, then one day, my father might look at me and see more than just a mistake. That day never came. Instead, I was framed for theft. It happened on the eve of the summer solstice ball. The estate was buzzing with preparations. The Duke's favored guests had arrived, nobles with sons of marrying age, and Celine had her eye on one in particular, the heir of House Bravon, a proud and arrogant young man whose family crest weighed more than his wit. I was tasked with polishing silverware in the grand hall when the screaming started. Minutes later, 2 guards seized me by the arms and dragged me into the center of the ballroom, where every guest could see me. The Bravon ring, a gold band set with the house's signature black sapphire, was found tucked beneath my mattress. It was laughable. As if I'd ever even touched something so fine, let alone had the gall to steal it. But no one cared that it made no sense. The ring was missing, and I was the perfect scapegoat. A bastard with no title, no mother to protect her, no value to the house beyond menial labor. Celine watched it all from the staircase, lips curved in triumph. She had always hated that I existed. I didn't need proof to know she was behind it. Duke Morvain didn't look me in the eye. He didn't ask questions. He simply waved his hand and said, "She'll work off her debt in the stables." Effective immediately. No trial. No protest. No goodbye. Just a swift sentence to a life of muck and hay, surrounded by beasts and forgotten tools. They stripped me of the little I had, my dresses, my books, even the old ribbon my mother left me. I was given rough linens, a lumpy cot in the stable loft, and told to keep quiet and be grateful I wasn't sent to the city dungeons. I cried once. Just once. On the 3rd night, curled up under a leaking roof with a chill in my bones, I let the tears fall. Not because I was afraid. Not because I was broken. But because I realized no one was coming to save me. That night, I buried the girl who believed in family. In justice. In mercy. And I gave birth to someone new. I woke every day before the sun, hauling water, scrubbing troughs, shoveling manure with bleeding hands. My fingers blistered, my back ached, but my eyes were sharp. I listened. I learned. Every passing servant, every merchant who came and went, I memorized names, gossip, power plays. Knowledge became my armor. Resentment became my fuel. 2 years passed. I was no longer the fragile girl who once begged for recognition. I had grown into something far more dangerous. Quiet. Observant. Cold. And then, everything changed with a boy named Liss. He stumbled into the stables one stormy night, soaked to the bone, eyes wild with fear. He looked no older than 17, dressed in filthy rags that didn't match his bearing. I recognized the look in his eyes. Desperation. I offered him food, warmth, silence. I asked no questions. But Liss wasn't what he seemed. By the 3rd day, I caught him speaking fluent highborn dialect to the horses. By the 5th, I found a royal insignia tucked in the lining of his boot. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He was a prince, exiled from a rival kingdom after a failed coup, hunted by assassins, surviving on luck and shadows. He should have killed me for knowing. Instead, he told me the truth. Everything. And for the first time in years, someone looked at me not with pity or contempt, but with respect. I hid him. Fed him. Protected him when soldiers came searching. I smuggled him out of the estate under a false trade cart, risking everything. When he asked me why, I didn't have an answer. Maybe I saw something in him that mirrored the fire inside me. Or maybe I was just tired of letting fate win. Before he left, he gripped my hands and said, "I will return, Alara. And when I do, I won't forget what you've done." I watched the cart roll away into the dawn mist, and for the first time since the ring was planted under my mattress, I felt something I hadn't dared feel in years. Hope. But hope alone wouldn't be enough. If I wanted revenge, I needed power. Status. Wealth. And a new name. The bastard stable girl was gone. Now, I would rise, not through pity, not through apology, but through cunning. I would build a mask they couldn't penetrate. A noble woman they couldn't trace. And when they saw me again, it would be too late. Disappearing wasn't hard. No one watched the stables. No one cared if the bastard girl vanished. One night, I left with nothing but a patch of copper coins I'd earned selling herbs and salves to passing travelers, and a single name whispered by Lys before he departed, a merchant contact in the eastern provinces who owed him a favor. I walked for 2 days before someone offered me a ride on a cabbage cart. I bartered my knowledge of horse medicine for meals and slept in stables or under trees until I reached the outer markets of Venabril, a city where bloodlines mattered less than clever tongues and full purses. I introduced myself as Isolde. No surname, no traceable roots. Just Isolde, a widow from the north with a sharp eye for trade and a silver tongue. It was a lie, of course. Every word was carefully stitched into a believable backstory. I even adopted the accent, forced a faint limp, and wore a mourning ring. The merchant Lys mentioned turned out to be a fur trader named Orlin, grizzled and perpetually annoyed. He remembered Lys, and after I recited the right phrase, debt runs deeper than gold, and loyalty runs deeper still, he agreed to give me work. At first, I was just another pair of hands, tallying crates and checking hide quality. But I was faster than the others. More precise. I kept the books in perfect order and started pointing out flaws in deals that saved him thousands. Within months, he trusted me to negotiate. I dressed plainly, but spoke with calm authority. Nobles began asking who I was. I never gave them the full truth. Only enough to make them wonder. Then came the day a minor noble offered me land in exchange for managing his failing vineyard. I took the offer. Within a year, I turned the vineyard into the region's top producer, tripling its profits. I didn't just make money. I made connections. And more importantly, I learned how to manipulate the currency of power, favor. Whispers began following me into rooms. That mysterious northern widow with an uncanny mind for business. A woman who came from nowhere but made gold rain from dust. I embraced the myth. By the time I stepped foot in the capital, I wasn't just Isolde. I was Lady Isolde of Alolan Vineyards, trade advisor to half a dozen lords, and a guest of honor at merchant guild banquets. My dresses were tailored, my hair always pinned in the latest court style, and my silence made me more feared than speech ever could. I paid for the finest tutors to train me in etiquette, law, and noble history. Every weakness I once had, I erased. I became a woman no one could look down on. But I didn't forget. I never forgot. Celine's name still came up in idle gossip. She was betrothed to Lord Thorn, a shallow, older nobleman known for gambling and worse. Her beauty was praised, but her dowry was shrinking. House Morvain had been bleeding wealth slowly, trying to cling to appearances. Duke Morvain himself had been accused of mismanaging funds, though nothing had come of it yet. That's when I knew. The cracks were forming. I just needed to press in the right place. Then fate handed me the perfect tool. King Reynald of Varelis. Young, unmarried, powerful, and infamous for rejecting courtly women, announced a search for a strategic queen. Not a romantic one. He wanted a woman who could negotiate, navigate court politics, and stabilize the merchant class. It wasn't a contest of beauty, but of mind. The royal advisors scouted noble families, quietly hosting invitation-only suppers and charity galas where they observed potential candidates. I attended one of these galas in a sapphire gown, masked, as was tradition. No one recognized me. Not even when Celine entered the ballroom. Her eyes swept past me like I was furniture. And for the first time, I felt nothing but amusement. She still thought the world belonged to her. She hadn't noticed how many noblewomen snubbed her now, how Lord Thorn barely spoke to her in public, how the hems of her dress had been poorly stitched. At that gala, I caught the attention of Lord Mirian, one of the king's top advisors. He watched me as I debated land tariffs and trade routes with a wine merchant from the coast. Later, he approached me and asked, "Who taught you to speak like a queen?" I smiled and replied, "The world did." A week later, I received a sealed invitation to dine at the palace. It wasn't an official summons, it was a test. I wore a gray velvet gown embroidered with storm lilies and walked into the lion's den with my chin high. The palace was grander than anything I'd ever seen. Gilded pillars, tapestries woven with the kingdom's bloody history, and servants who moved like shadows. And there, at the end of the long table, was King Reynald. He was younger than I expected. 30, perhaps, with sharp features and colder eyes than winter. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've built yourself an empire out of nothing," he said. "Tell me why I should trust you with mine." I answered without blinking. "Because I know what it's like to have everything taken. And I know how to rebuild better. Stronger. Smarter. I won't waste what I've earned." And I won't waste what you offer. His gaze didn't soften. But it didn't harden either. By the end of dinner, he said one thing. I'll see you again. And he did. 3 weeks of dinners. Court appearances. Private consultations. I impressed his council, charmed his generals, and humiliated a snide duke who tried to corner me into admitting my past. The king watched it all. And then, one cold morning, he arrived at my estate with a crown-shaped box in his hand. You're not who they expected, he said. That's why I want you. And just like that, I became queen. They thought I would disappear as a servant. Instead, I had returned, veiled in power, armored in wealth, crowned by a king. And House Morvain had no idea who was now sitting on the throne above them. The wedding was a spectacle. I made sure of it. Not because I wanted the grandeur, but because I knew the guest list would include those who once stood by and watched me fall. Every noble family who whispered about the bastard girl in the stables was now bowing at my feet, forced to smile as they watched me marry the most powerful man in the kingdom. The ceremony was held in the royal gardens, beneath an arch of white fire blossoms, the rarest bloom in Borellis, once reserved only for the purest of bloodlines. I wore them like a crown, each petal a reminder that bloodlines meant nothing when you knew how to win power yourself. Celine was there. Of course she was. She wouldn't dare miss it. The invitation had been anonymous, sent from the palace with no signature. I wanted her to come. I wanted her to see. She arrived draped in borrowed jewels and a gown a season behind fashion, her eyes wide as she stared up at me in my royal silks. She didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker of suspicion. And I didn't speak to her. Not yet. Let her wonder. Let her stew. King Renaud didn't offer me love. That wasn't what either of us wanted. He offered me status, and I gave him loyalty. We made a pact, I would help him expand the kingdom's trade alliances, and he would give me the autonomy no queen before me had ever held. I wasn't a decoration in his court. I was a weapon he had chosen, sharp, decisive, and capable of slicing through every obstacle that stood in our way. And I used that power well. I restructured the palace finances. I created new merchant incentives that brought wealth pouring into our coffers. I exposed 3 nobles who had been embezzling funds for years and had them tried before the entire court. Whispers of Queen Isolde's ruthlessness spread quickly. They said I was cold. Merciless. Too ambitious. They were right. But with each victory, I kept my true goal in sight. House Morvain. They were crumbling. I saw it in the reports I quietly requested from my spies. Their lands had been underperforming for seasons. The vineyard I once resurrected had surpassed them in profits 5 times over. Celine's engagement to Lord Thorne had collapsed in scandal after his debts caught up with him. The Duke standing in the royal court was fading, his name slipping from council lips like smoke. And still, he had no idea that the queen seated beside his king was the daughter he'd cast into the mud. Until the day he came crawling to the palace gates. It started with a letter. He addressed it to Queen Isolde of Borellis, requesting an audience regarding an investment opportunity. Polite. Humble. Desperate. I ignored it. Another came. Then another. Each more urgent than the last. Then, finally, he arrived in person. With Celine. I watched from the royal balcony as they stood outside the gilded gates, dressed in their finest rags, eyes scanning the towering palace that had once been beyond their reach. Celine looked thinner, her skin paler than I remembered. She clung to her father's arm like a frightened child. And the Duke, once proud and cruel, stood hunched and small, a man begging for a handout from the daughter he never claimed. The guards asked if I would see them. No, I said. They can wait. So they did. For hours, under the blistering sun, while nobles passed by whispering and pointing. The Duke sent a message up with a footman, hoping to tug at the Queen's sympathy. I tore it in half without reading. That night, they were turned away. No audience. No charity. No explanation. Just silence. I knew they'd be back. And they were. The second time, I allowed them into the outer hall. Not the throne room. Just close enough to taste the power they couldn't touch. Celine looked at me then. Really looked. There was something flickering in her eyes. Recognition? Doubt? Fear? I didn't flinch. Duke Morvain bowed low, his voice shaking as he explained their situation. Poor harvests. Unreliable tenants. Trade debts. He humbly requested a royal loan to stabilize his lands, citing his years of loyal service. I let him finish. Then I leaned forward, eyes locked on his, and said, "You once cast out a girl for a crime she didn't commit. You sentenced her to the stables, stripped her of dignity, and watched her suffer in silence. Tell me, Duke, do you believe justice ever finds those who think themselves untouchable?" He stared at me, confused. Then the color drained from his face. His mouth opened. Closed. Celine gasped. It hit them like a blade to the throat. "You," she whispered. I didn't let her finish. "Guards," I said calmly, "escort them out." They screamed. Begged. Celine clung to the marble columns like a drowning girl. The Duke shouted something about honor, about blood. But I didn't hear it. I was already walking away. Let them cry. Let them fall. They threw me to the dirt and expected me to stay buried. But I had learned to bloom in the shadows. And now, I stood tall in the light, crowned, powerful, and unbothered by the ruins I'd left behind. In the days that followed, the court buzzed. Rumors twisted through the halls like smoke. Some said Queen Isolde had humiliated a visiting duke for insolence. Others claimed he'd insulted the crown and was lucky to leave with his head. Only a few guessed the truth, and none dared say it aloud. But the king knew. He always knew more than he let on. Renaud didn't question me about my past. He never once asked where I'd come from or what blood ran through my veins. But that evening, after the Morvaines were removed from the palace, he poured me a glass of wine and said, "You never needed vengeance to prove your worth. But I hope it tasted as sweet as you imagined." "It tasted like closure," I replied. He smiled slightly. "Then I hope you've had your fill." But I hadn't. Not yet. Because revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about redefinition. And I wasn't done reshaping what it meant to be Alara. The Morvaines returned to their broken estate, and I sent no messengers, no aid. They would find no allies in my court. Word spread that they had been stripped of royal favor, and nobles, ever the opportunists, began distancing themselves. Lands once tied to House Morvaine were quietly absorbed by wealthier families. Marriage prospects vanished. Invitations dried up. By the start of the next season, their name was more liability than legacy. I should have felt satisfied. And I did, momentarily. But power, I'd learned, reveals the cracks in everything. Nobles began questioning my past. Politely, at first. Little comments about how mysterious I was, how I seemed too clever to have come from nowhere. Then came the backhanded compliments, the veiled insults disguised as curiosity. "Your poise is remarkable, your majesty, so rare in those not born to court. Surely someone with your experience understands the struggles of commoners." One woman even dared to ask if I'd been a governess in my previous life. They thought they were subtle. They weren't. I realized then that while I had conquered the Morvaines, I had not yet conquered the game. I didn't just want to be queen. I wanted to be unshakable. So I began assembling a new network, not of nobles, but of merchants, bankers, scholars. The kind of people who truly held the kingdom together. The kind who didn't care who your parents were as long as you brought results. I elevated them, gave them positions on advisory councils, invited their children to palace functions. Slowly, I made it so that insulting me meant insulting the very foundation of the kingdom's wealth. And then I turned my eyes on the court. There were lords who had scoffed at my rise, who still clung to ancient bloodlines like shields. I didn't confront them. I outmaneuvered them. One by one, I exposed their failures. A misused tax here. A forged shipment there. I ensured the consequences were public, legal, and devastating. And all without ever raising my voice. At a royal banquet, I watched one such lord grovel before the king after being found guilty of funneling treasury funds into his own estate. The entire court turned their eyes to me. They knew. I hadn't said a word, but they knew. And still, they whispered. About the girl I used to be. About stables and bastard blood. Until I decided to shut them up once and for all. I hosted a grand royal tournament in honor of the kingdom's founding. Knights, archers, scholars, even poets competed for gold and glory. But the true purpose was something else. I invited every noble family. Including the Morvaines. They arrived late, desperate and drawn. The Duke was gaunt, aged 10 years and 2. Celine wore a dress clearly borrowed, and her smile was brittle. The court stared but said nothing. I made sure they were seated close enough to see every honor bestowed on me, every cheer I earned, every bow directed my way. When the final victor was crowned, a peasant-born scholar who had bested the king's own cousin in strategy, I took the stage. I praised his wit, his mind, his perseverance. I looked directly at the Morvaines and said, "Blood is not what makes a person noble. Actions do. We honor those who rise through strength, not birth. The applause was deafening. Celine looked like she might faint. And then, as the hall began to clear, the Duke approached me alone. For the first time in my life, he bowed to me. "I know who you are now," he said. His voice was hoarse. And I was wrong. About everything. I tilted my head. "You were wrong the moment you chose silence over truth. The moment you protected your title more than your own blood." He looked up, pain written across his face. "Is there anything I can do to earn forgiveness?" I gave him the answer he gave me years ago. "No," he bowed again, slower this time. "Then I'll take my shame and go." "You already have," I replied. He walked away without looking back. And I didn't watch him leave. I turned to the king, who had been watching from a distance. He said nothing, just offered me his arm. And as I walked beside him, crowned, unchallenged, unstoppable, I realized the revenge was no longer just personal. It was legacy. I thought the whispers would die after that night. After the public fall of Duke Morvain and my declaration that blood did not define nobility, I expected silence. But the court doesn't forget. They just wait for a new angle. And they found it. They began to call me the common queen. Not to my face. Never directly. But I heard it. In the halls, in the backrooms, in the clipped tones of noble wives who resented the influence I wielded. They mocked the way I handled trade affairs directly. They sneered at my use of scholars and merchants in my inner circle. Some even said I cheapened the throne by raising those of unrefined lineage into power. The irony was suffocating. I had done more in 2 years than many of them had done in decades. Trade was booming. Crime had dropped. The treasury overflowed. Yet they hated me because I didn't bow to their ancient names or kiss the rings of decrepit bloodlines that had done nothing but rot in their own privilege. I could have ignored them. I almost did. But power is not just gained. It must be defended. And I wasn't about to let the title I fought for become a weapon they could use against me. So I gave them something to choke on. I created the Guild Summit. For the first time in Varella's history, I invited representatives from every major economic sector, textile merchants, blacksmith guilds, shipbuilders, healers, even the glassmakers from the mountain provinces, to gather in the capital for a week of formal recognition and celebration. I signed it into law that these guilds would be given a rotating voice in the King's Economic Council. Their votes wouldn't override the nobles, but they would influence policy. The nobles screamed. They called it heresy. They claimed I was trying to dismantle the monarchy. One particularly bold baron stood in the royal court and accused me of dragging the crown through the mud. You don't build a kingdom by polishing your family crest. You build it with iron, salt, wood, and sweat. These people, these workers, are the spine of this realm. I merely gave the spine a voice. He opened his mouth again. I didn't let him speak. And if that offends you, perhaps the crown is too heavy for your fragile pride. The room fell silent. From that day on, no one dared call me the common queen again. Not where I could hear it. Instead, they started calling me something else. The Iron Orchid. Delicate in appearance. Unyielding beneath. And yet, as the palace flourished, I could not forget the shadows that once helped me rise. I hadn't seen Lis since the night I helped him escape. Years had passed, and I had no idea if he lived or died. But I hadn't stopped searching. Quietly, through spies and messengers, I put out word in border towns and among old merchants, looking for any sign of him. One night, after a long council meeting, a sealed letter was placed on my desk. No seal. No return mark. Just my name in familiar handwriting. Isolde. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was from Lis. He was alive. He had survived exile, reclaimed a portion of his family's holdings in secret, and was now working as a shadow diplomat between fractured kingdoms. He had heard whispers of a queen in Varelis who reminded him of a girl he once knew. He didn't dare approach until he was certain I was safe. But now, he was asking for an audience. I didn't hesitate. The meeting was arranged in the palace garden, late at night, where no one would interrupt. He appeared from the shadows as if he'd never left them. Taller now. Sharper. His voice still low, still careful. You've changed, he said. So have you. He bowed, not like a subject, but like a man acknowledging an equal. You built everything I hoped you would, he said. And you survived everything I feared you wouldn't. We didn't speak of the past in detail. We didn't need to. The silence between us was filled with understanding. With shared history. With debt and dignity. Before he left, I asked him, why did you come now? He paused. Because I didn't want to be just a memory in your empire. I wanted to see you, truly see you, before the world made you untouchable. I said nothing. But I didn't let him go far. The next morning, I appointed him as foreign liaison under a new name, giving him access to the diplomatic networks of the crown. Officially, he was just another envoy. Unofficially, he became the only man in the palace who knew every piece of my past and had never used it against me. His loyalty was quiet. Constant. And, for the first time since I had risen, I felt something that had eluded me in my climb. Safety. Not weakness. Not softness. Just safety. Power has a scent. It clings to your skin, to your clothes, to the way people look at you when you enter a room. I wore it every day, not just in the weight of the crown on my head or the velvet gowns tailored to perfection, but in the silence that followed my footsteps. No one dared speak first when I walked into the chamber. No one challenged my decisions. No one questioned the girl who had risen from the stables to the throne, because they no longer saw the girl. They saw the queen. The Iron Orchid. The woman who had destroyed a legacy with a word and built her own without a drop of noble blood. And yet, for all that fear and admiration, I knew one thing for certain: power, no matter how carefully constructed, is always under siege. The rumors had quieted, but not vanished. The noble families who had bowed were still watching, waiting, whispering. They didn't just want to see me fail. They wanted to be the ones who made it happen. I had dismantled their comfort, their hierarchy, their illusion of untouchable birthright, and they would not forget that. So when the royal census revealed a series of inconsistencies in the outer provinces, missing tax records, falsely reported populations, and more money vanishing than could be explained, I knew where to look. House Farinor, one of the oldest and most prestigious bloodlines in Varelis, sat at the center of it. Their lands were vast, their holdings nearly untouched by reform, and their countess, Lady Merrill, had always eyed me with disdain barely masked by etiquette. She was clever, subtle, and deadly with a smile. Instead of confronting her directly, I did what I always had. I outmaneuvered her. I sent Lys, now acting as my silent blade behind palace doors, to investigate. He posed as a trade envoy seeking new wine contracts and uncovered enough forged signatures and bribed tax collectors to strip her family of half their estate. But I didn't stop there. I hosted a grand banquet in her honor. A trap, masked in silk and gold. She arrived draped in jewels, confident in her standing, her smugness radiating through the room. She toasted to long-standing nobility and gave a speech about respecting traditional values. The court laughed politely. Then I stood. I held up a single piece of parchment, her own forged census report, and read it aloud to the entire room. No rage. No threats. Just facts. By the time I finished, Lady Merrill's face was white. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but I cut her off with one sentence. Nobility without integrity is nothing but rotten lace. The silence afterward was suffocating. The next morning, House Farinor's lands were seized, their title revoked, and Lady Merrill was exiled to a northern convent with no return rights. The message was clear. Challenge me, and I will not only remove your power, I will make the world watch. After that, no noble questioned the legitimacy of my rule again. And yet, not all battles are fought with blades or decrees. Some are internal. It was Lys who saw it first. The change in me. You don't sleep, he said one evening. You don't rest. You win every fight, but you look like you're losing something else. I didn't answer him. I didn't know how. Because he was right. Revenge had once given me purpose. Every sleepless night, every choice, every move, it all led back to proving I was more than what they thought I was. But now, I had proven it. And more. So why did I still feel like I was gripping the throne with both hands, as if the moment I let go, the girl from the stables would return? Maybe I'm just afraid, I finally admitted. That everything I built was a reaction. That I wouldn't know who I am without the fight. Lys looked at me then, long and steady. Then maybe it's time to build something for yourself, not just against them. The idea was foreign. Almost laughable. To build something not out of revenge, but out of desire. Out of vision. But the seed was planted. And as the palace prepared for the spring season, diplomatic visits, festivals, political games, I found myself wondering what it might look like to shape the future, not just avenge the past. And then something happened that made the decision for me. A petition arrived from a distant village on the border of two warring kingdoms. A group of orphans had been displaced by conflict, their homes burned, their guardians lost. The local nobles refused to intervene. It was out of their jurisdiction. Too far. Too poor. Too unimportant. I stared at the parchment for a long time. Then I stood. By sundown, I had arranged for food, shelter, education, and protection. I restructured the Crown's emergency funds to create a new humanitarian relief branch, staffed not by nobles, but by the very merchants and commoners the court once laughed at. I called it the Iron Wing. And I made sure the entire kingdom knew where it came from. That night, I walked alone through the royal stables. They had been rebuilt, modernized, no longer the filthy pit I'd once been thrown into, but the scent was still the same. Clean hay. Polished wood. Memory. I stood in the stall where I once slept, where I once cried, where I once made the vow to rise. And I whispered, "It's done." But it wasn't. Because I had one vow left to fulfill. Not to them. To myself. There was one final thread. One last tangle in the tapestry of my past that remained untouched. My mother. No portrait of her hung in House Morvain. No mention of her name appeared in their records. She was a shadow, a stain they had tried to erase, and for a long time, I let them. I told myself I didn't need to unearth her memory, that what mattered was who I had become, not who had given me life. But now, with my crown secure, with the kingdom silent under my rule, I found my thoughts returning to her. To the woman who had borne me in shame and died without a name. So I ordered a search. Discreet, quiet, and thorough. What I discovered was worse than I expected. Her name had been Lady Saralyn. She was a minor noblewoman from a dissolved house, orphaned young, married off to Duke Morvain as part of a trade settlement. When she became pregnant, the Duke denied her, claiming she had seduced a servant. She was cast out. Banished to a convent, her child taken from her and left to be raised as a bastard in the estate. That child was me. She died 2 years later. Alone, penniless, her name dragged through scandal so the Duke could secure a more favorable marriage with a wealthier woman. He let her rot. He let her die. And then he raised me as a living reminder of his cruelty, only to cast me down again when I became inconvenient. I felt no grief. Only rage. But I didn't scream. I didn't burn his house to the ground. I had already won the war. This was about legacy now. I commissioned a statue in her name. Saralyn of House Aloan, matron of mercy, patron of orphans and forgotten daughters. I buried the truth of her suffering under stone and gold, turning her shame into reverence. The nobles saw only a charitable gesture. The people saw a queen honoring her lost lineage. But I knew what it was. It was reclamation. And once that was done, I allowed myself to begin something new. Liss had stayed close, always silent, always watching. He never asked for more than I was willing to give. But his presence became something I depended on. He was the only one who spoke to me without fear. The only one who remembered the mud, the blood, the beginning. One evening, as a storm brewed outside the palace walls, he met me in the library. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small box. Inside was a ring. Not gold. Not jeweled. Just iron, smooth, polished, and familiar. "The one you wore in the stables," I whispered. "I thought it was lost." "I kept it," he said. "As proof. That I wasn't dreaming. That everything we survived was real." I looked at him. At the man who had once been a frightened runaway in my care, who had returned as my shadow, my blade, my constant. And for the first time in my reign, I allowed myself to be soft. I took the ring and slid it onto my finger. "I'm not a girl anymore," I said. "No," he replied. "You're a queen. But you don't have to wear armor all the time." So I didn't. That night, I let myself rest. No planning. No revenge. No strategy. Just silence. Just breath. Just the weight of a crown no longer worn for war. Days turned into weeks. The kingdom flourished. Trade expanded beyond the northern borders. The Iron Wing built schools and hospitals in provinces once forgotten. My name was spoken not only in fear, but in awe. And then the final test came. An emissary from the Eastern Empire, a ruthless, expansionist kingdom known for devouring its neighbors, arrived with a veiled threat dressed as diplomacy. They wanted an alliance. And by alliance, they meant control. They offered marriage between their crown prince and one of our noble daughters, laced with promises of trade favors and military protection. The court leaned in. Many saw the offer as an honor. An opportunity. I saw it for what it was. A leash. They expected me to flatter them. To bow. To compromise. Instead, I sent them away with a rewritten treaty, one that offered economic partnership on equal terms, with no marriage, no titles exchanged, and strict protections for Varela's sovereignty. The court waited, holding its breath. If the empire accepted, it would mark a new era. If they didn't, it could mean war. Weeks passed. Then word came. They had signed. No marriage. No control. Only respect. And with that signature, the world knew. Verelis was not ruled by a puppet queen or a noble-born ornament. It was ruled by a woman who had once been thrown into filth and rose, not by favor, but by fire. The day I walked through the gardens without guards, without a crown, without ceremony, the palace didn't crumble. The kingdom didn't fall. No one gasped. No one dared stop me. And that was how I knew I had truly won. Not through fear. Not through force. But because I had made myself undeniable. I stood at the edge of the koi pond near the eastern wing, once a place I used to clean as a stable hand when the duke's horses soiled the marble path. Now it was my favorite place to think. No royal banners. No polished throne. Just still water and silence. A young girl walked by with her mother, one of the new staff apprentices we had taken in from the provinces. The girl stared at me with wide eyes. "That's the queen," she whispered, and I turned. "You don't have to whisper," I said. "Come walk with me." She hesitated, then stepped forward. Her mother panicked, bowing and apologizing, but I shook my head. Let her be bold. Boldness is the beginning of queens. That girl reminded me of myself, once. A child with dirt on her hands and defiance in her eyes, punished for existing. But the world that punished me was gone. I had burned it down and built something better. And now, I saw it clearly, revenge was only the beginning. My true triumph wasn't in casting out the Morvaines, or humiliating the nobles, or rising above the filth. It was in making sure no girl after me would ever have to crawl her way through mud just to be heard. Lys met me under the wisteria arbor that night. The flowers were in bloom, heavy and violet, the air thick with summer warmth. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside me, watching the stars appear above the palace rooftops. "You've changed everything," he finally said. "More than I ever thought possible." "I had to," I said. "For her." He looked confused, so I added, "The girl I used to be." There was a long silence. Then he asked, "And what does she want now?" I thought about it. About everything I had chased. The rage. The ambition. The impossible standards. And how all of it had turned into something greater. "She wants peace," I said. "Not rest. Not weakness. Just peace." "And what about the woman you are now?" "She wants the same," I whispered. That night, I returned to my chambers and placed my iron ring beside the royal seal on my desk. 2 symbols. One of the girl who fought to survive. One of the queen who built a new world. Both of them were me. Weeks later, news came from House Morvaine. The estate had been sold. The duke had retired in shame to the countryside, stripped of title and relevance. Celine had fled the capital, married to a minor trader in a distant port city, her name all but forgotten. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Their fall was complete. Their legacy buried. And I felt nothing. Because vengeance had long since lost its flavor. I spent the next season rewriting the kingdom's noble charter. For the first time in Verelis history, legitimacy would no longer be defined by bloodline alone. Adoption, merit, service, these would now hold equal weight. A bastard child would never again be told they were unworthy of honor. I signed the decree with my full name. Elara Saralyn. And then I held a ceremony. Not a coronation, but a commemoration. I invited children from orphanages, students from the Iron Wing academies, young girls training in trade and governance. I let them walk through the palace gates, touch the marble floors, eat from the royal banquet, and see what was possible. "You built a future," Lys said quietly, watching them dance. "No," I replied. "I built a door. Now they can walk through it." As the sun set over the capital, casting gold light across the palace domes, I looked down at the city. My city. And I felt it fully, for the first time, not the hunger, not the anger, not the ache to prove something. But the calm that comes after the storm. They cast me out as a servant. They mocked my name, erased my mother, threw me into the dirt and told me that was where I belonged. But I built my own crown. And now I wear it, not for vengeance. But for victory.